UAVs is something that people like to do for fun, but there's also a lot of serious commercial applications going on up here in Maine. So we got, a good mix of people who are doing it for, everything from uh, uh, agriculture, industrial inspection, to real estate, to people that are just using it for creative purposes, like in weddings and commercials and that sort of thing, all the way on to folks that are using it for esports, so doing racing and those kind of things. So it's been, I think that's what's drawn me to it, is that the diversity of the community is so vast, as well as the technology is pretty incredible. I mean, who doesn't like flying robots, right? There's always, and there's a lot of, I'd say there's a lot of, our community, it's a pretty tight knit community, especially when it comes to the racing and folks that are doing photography and real estate. They kind of understand they're creating a brand new industry. So that's what kind of works for us being within here, is that we're able to work with a lot of other people that are just infused into our group. Like, so for example, just last week, one of the things we do within our community is we do a lot of social analysis and demographic analysis of our members, and try to understand like what things they're interested in. And there's obviously, with drones, there's a lot of people that are really into doing video production, and one of the biggest pieces of equipment are gimbals. Well, a lot of people don't build their own gimbals. That's usually something you go out and you buy, because you have to tune PIDs, and you have to make sure you have the right weights and balances, and there's a kind of a complex kind of manufacturing process there, and you can go out and pick up one for $200-300. But what's the fun in that? So we had like 3 or 4 guys come here with gimbals everywhere from the cheapy ones you buy at Best Buy to like $3,000 production quality gimbals, and we took them all apart and we figured out how they worked, and we said, okay, here are the parts we need to put together, and now we're going to make our own. So ultimately, I think for me, maker spaces in making is essentially, it's about voiding warranties, man. It's about understanding I'm not going to buy something unless I can repair it, right? I want to be a resource that for people who look at some of this technology and find it very intimidating, that they can come here, we can learn together. So it's worked for us. I mean, I feel like, the average consumer nowadays will go to Best Buy and spend $1,300 on a DJI Phantom, bring it home, in a couple months they'll crash it, and they won't know what to do. Essentially, the only option they have is to send it back to China. Well, that's the first thing we did in our group, was say, hey, you don't have to do that. You can bring it here, and it's really not as complicated as you think it is. It's just a big piece of plastic with some motors and some ESCs and a circuit board. I mean, there's obviously things that are more complicated than others, but it's good for us. In my own small community, you could debate whether somebody who flies a plastic toy in the air is a pilot or not, considering we have commercial pilots who fly around 747s, and we both use that same way to describe ourselves. But either way, one could definitely try to make the other one say, oh, you're not really a pilot, you fly a toy around. Well, that's true in some ways, but to the FAA's perspective, they call them a pilot. So I'm not sure. So I guess until the government has come along and really made a clean category of what a maker is, and even really what a makerspace is, right now we're kind of in the middle of, there's no business category out there for makerspace. So until some other larger entity comes along and says, okay, here are the things you have to have and do in order to be a maker, even a makerspace. I mean, ultimately, it's people coming together to make, build, and fix shit. That's really, I think, how the Open Bench has organically evolved over time too. It's become a space that has turned itself into the needs of the people who show up. I remember the first time I met Jake, we were doing, maybe a month or two after I met Jake and I had become a member, he did a welding Wednesday, and I had never welded before, so I was really interested about this. And he came out, and one of the first things he said was, I have probably laid, 3 miles of bead in my life, and I'm still a crappy welder. And to us, who had, the group of 6 of us had never welded at all, I was kind of like, wow, you're going to teach us all, and you've welded 4 miles of bead, and you're still considering yourself a crappy welder? And he's like, yeah, and our goal for today is to make the rest of you crappy welders. And that's what we aspired to be, is that we knew, hey, you're gonna go into this and you're gonna fail, but ultimately, without the courage and the curiosity behind doing anything, you're not going to do it. So I'd say it's really how we run this place, right? I think one of the monikers around here is safety third, and it's always behind curiosity and courage, and I think another big personality trait that somebody has to be prepared to do here, especially to survive as a maker, or make any kind of income off of it, or pick up new skills, is you have to come in with a certain level of humility to open yourself up to be taught, right? Or even open yourself up to trying something and failing miserably, and having somebody who knows just a little bit better than you say, hey, I can see that your cuts are just horrible, so maybe you should do this and that. And I've seen it the other way too, where people come in and I obviously wouldn't name names or anything, but I remember a member in our old spot was welding razor blades together in a long, kind of like a thing, and totally like one of these things where it's like you have to have a ton of skill to be able to weld razor blades end to end. We came up with the term peacocking, essentially like this personality that shows up to the shop and is basically doing things just to show everyone else how great they are at a particular skill. They didn't last very long, right? Because ultimately people aren't going to want to interact with personality traits like that, because they're going to feel intimidated. It's not a welcoming environment. And also, it's kind of a stupid thing to do in general. So yeah, definitely come in with your humility hat on, and know that even though your expertise could be in a particular area, there's somebody who's going to walk through the door who is a composite scientist, right? I can cut carbon fiber, build drones, but I use carbon fiber, but I don't understand that composite science. So to be able to sit down and kind of listen to what they have to say is the key, definitely. Open source software, and the other aspect that we do within the Maine Drone Society is the concept of open technology, like open space technology, essentially, where you come together as a group of people and you're organizing community events, not in a way where I'm gonna organize a community event and you're all gonna come here and listen to me speak. It's kind of like an everyday conference, right? And really what open space teaches us is that the best interactions happen during the water breaks around the water cooler, right? It's like that's what we go for when we go to a conference. So why not create a space where people can come and say, hey, this is what I would like to learn, and if other people are also interested in learning that, they're going to kind of get involved. So for me, makerspaces really sort of have been born from open source and open tech backgrounds, where you're not, you want to see what's inside, but then you also want to be open enough to show others what's going on internally. So yeah, I mean, the aspect of having a physical place to do it is really, I would say it's secondary to the people and the openness. If you've seen the Open Bench V1 or even Open Bench V2, it was an empty, abandoned warehouse with like a circular saw and a couple drills. You didn't go there because it was bad. There's probably 50 other places you could have met that would have been more hospitable. But what brought you there was the people, was guys like Jake and the other folks and things. So to me, yeah, the place is less important than the people within it. I think the Open Bench, and there's been times where the Open Bench was closed. I mean, we went from V1 to V2. V2 needed to be totally built out. There wasn't any walls. It was just totally empty space. I would say that was a makerspace totally, because we were making it. There wasn't anything in it. And then the Open Bench closed. We kind of everything fell apart over in Thompson's Point, and it was before we got this place. And the open bench was still was very much alive. I mean, it was alive, not in that central place where we were all meeting, but when I needed to weld, I knew whose house I needed to go to weld in his garage because he had the welder, right? I knew that if I needed to use a couple more 3D printers because I had a huge run of XYZ to do, I knew I could contact these people. So I think definitely the only way something like this works is that the people is what makes the community, and understand people's willingness to be open is what makes the community. The building is kind of the bonus, right? And I've definitely know that one thing I've learned about maker spaces and kind of the business model around maker spaces, and seeing them, doing some research about them nationally, and definitely being involved here quite a bit, is the worst thing you could have when you're starting a makerspace is a big empty building and a ton of money. Because then you're gonna sink all your money into that empty building and then be like, oh yeah, all these people are gonna come. I'm just gonna generate this community from an empty building full of expensive equipment. And I'm sure that's worked in the past, but we've also seen some pretty big ones fall because of that. Like tech shops, for example. I mean, gosh, they put a ton of money into those buildings and a ton of money into that equipment, but they never really, and they charged an arm and a leg to get into it, but they never really created a great community around it, regardless of the fact that, they had awesome equipment and great facilities, but ultimately people weren't drawn to the community, they weren't drawn to the people, so I think that's kind of where it failed. So yeah, I mean, you definitely don't need a place. You need people that are willing to be open and humble in order to make a maker space. Well, for Maine Drone Society, our key way of organizing our events and what we do and the projects we take on is purely around open space technology. So, there's people who make an effort to be part of our group. They come to meetups, they interact with us online, they interact with us through social methods, and ultimately it's about kind of letting folks, think of what the problem is that they want to solve, and then others get involved with, oh good, that one, the extruder heated up. Ultimately get involved to building it. So our process right now, as it is, every couple weeks we get together and we just put a bunch of projects and ideas on the board, and we invite anyone within the community to come up with those ideas. And ultimately it ranges from, hey, I want to learn to build a gimbal, to I want to learn how to do precision agriculture. We had a bunch of geologists contact us from California, from New York, that were coming up here to do quite a large geology project, about 12 different sites, and they needed drone pilots for a week straight. So that was a huge project for us. But it really came out of the fact that we do a ton of work online to make sure we're found, right? Like, you look for drones in Maine and we're right there. And ultimately, I think the process is find the people, the person, the organization that has a problem, and then use the power of the community to solve that. And then the physical aspect of the process is usually, involves coming here, meeting, or doing some kind of virtual meeting. We have a lot of vendor relationships that we work with. We work with companies out of China that bring product over here. For example, we just did a drone build. We had to contact a company in China, so it's like, material acquisition and product acquisition is a big part of what we're doing. And then testing, especially for drones, is a huge part of it. Like, you don't want to really advocate for a particular type of product unless you've tested it. So we have a series of guys that are in our organizations that are designated product testers. So we'll get, gear from vendors that we'll use for a particular product. And then there's a lot of, essentially, I would call it industry research that needs to happen. So that goes on. And then, it really depends on the process. Sometimes it's, it really depends on the problem. Sometimes it's easy as, hey, I crashed and I need you to help me rebuild it. So in situations like that, it's our process is. We have a website, obviously, and we have a little form on the website, and it says, okay, what do you want to do? Do you have how we have a one-on-one 1 hour drone consultation, like a 3 hour drone consultation. If you want to do solar farm inspection, there's like a whole bunch of different public and private services that we build in kind of an a la carte way, and that allows us to kind of intake people, schedule, match people's needs with people within the community that have skills, and that's much more of a mechanical thing, but that's just kind of dealing with the volume, right? There's just a lot, but then from there, everything's different. So, yeah, I'd say most of the process, the technical, mechanical aspect of the process is done during intake, and then when it comes to like material acquisition, it's more like, okay, well, what are the profit margins we need to get? How do we bid? We built a drone for a energy company, I guess is the best way I could describe them, up northern Maine, and it was a $14,000 project to build this drone. So that same intake process, right? Somebody comes to us and says, "Hey, I want to build a drone. I need to do this, this, and this." Get a bunch of information. We go against all of our community experts. We just assemble a team, but then it's a huge process, right? You're like, okay, I got to talk to these companies in China. I got to get these parts CNC'd. I have to make sure he's got a good source for extra batteries and extra motors, and that it can be quite complex. So it kind of goes from the side of one side of the spectrum where it's like, hey, a kid just got a drone for Christmas and he wants to learn how to fly it, all the way to something like that. So it's really hard to do a one size fits all situation. But I think one of the things that we've realized as a community here is we have to do a better job of, I wouldn't say a better job. I would say there's definitely small businesses or people like myself that just have small communities within the community that have done a pretty good job building services and being able to generate revenue for the makerspace. Because ultimately we want this space to get better. We need to figure out ways to generate revenue for it. The makerspace itself can't do that just for insurance reason. That's not its core business proposition of building product. So what I want to know, what I'd like to understand, I guess from other maker spaces, is how do they allow members to build products and gain value out of their membership by designing and building products or offering services to the public. And really for me, it's more, I'd like to hear some success stories so we can kind of understand aspirational where we want to go. Like we see it here now, like there's definitely guys here that are, doing great projects on the, for companies, and I'd say the Open Bench project is known in Portland that, hey, if I need something built, I just go and write it on the whiteboard and I'm gonna get a call. But how does that work in other other cities, especially cities with a lot bigger population? Like Portland's a pretty small city. Maine in general is only 1 million people. So say you got something like this going on in Boston, you'd assume that there's more of that internal economy. So how does that work? Is that really a priority of the people that are running it? I think the words I'd leave you with when it comes to maker spaces and making in general is I know in our community it's build, fly, crash, repeat. Is that everything in here? It's rub dirt in it, or safety third. Is like kind of figure out what are those core. Or see one, do one, teach one is another one. What are those core metaphors that everybody in the community knows when you say it to them, and they can easily replicate that? These are like our gospel. Is that how everybody else is? I never really thought of it. Does everybody else kind of think that way? Is that what if maybe other people have different different terms that they look at? And I think what I think would be cool is like a T-shirt with like each one of those lines and share that across.